This happened about a year ago, and honestly, I had completely forgotten about it until another story on Reddit brought it to the front of my mind. My educational and professional backgrounds are firmly rooted in government and public policy. My chosen field is generally thought of as useless, low-paying, and without many opportunities to actually practice or advance in it. So you can imagine how happy I was when I got an offer to be a legislative director for a very high-profile state legislator. Things were pretty interesting at first. We lost our chief of staff to a better-paying job in the private sector about 2 months in, so I took over the day-to-day operations of managing the office, managing my boss, and dealing with every entitled constituent, pushy lobbyist, and haughty elected official under the sun. Even though my job was getting harder by the nanosecond, I was happy to be doing it. I'm a wonk at heart, and I was in wonk heaven at that office. That is, until the crazy people started calling, writing, and worse, visiting the office. If you've never worked in an elected official's office, let me give you a little rundown. Most people who reach out are normal, but sometimes angry, frustrated, scared, or all of the above. That's okay. Those are the people you want to hear from, and if you can, try to make happy. Conversely, there's a subset that will make you regret your decision to put off school for another year. It seems that every adult with an untreated psychological disorder within a 50-mile radius will reach out to you about some crazy shit. They've seen your boss on television, mentioned in the newspaper, or attended a hall meeting, and decided to push the limits of legislative accountability as far as it will stretch. I've had to reach out to the state troopers stationed in the Capitol for protection on multiple occasions. The legislative session wasn't too far away, and its approach was inspiring people to reach out. I first encountered these people when I was interning in DC. I was working in the personal office of a committee chairman, whose name everyone would recognize if I mentioned it, and because of his visibility, everyone and their dog would call. It was the fall of 2008. The economy had gone to shit, Obama was about to win the election, and I had people calling me about the government using emissions from microwaves to read the minds of Americans. That was the type of shit I expected to encounter when I started this job. So, of course, one day, I encountered something else. I went into the office super early one morning to get a jump start on my day. My boss had yelled at me for an hour the night before over something that wasn't even my fault, and I was in a particularly bad mood because of it. I figured diving into my work early would help me keep my attitude in check. As I sorted the mail and halfway listened to Rob and Meade bantering away on the giant flat screen we had in the office, I realized that I wasn't alone. A blonde, middle-aged woman was hovering over me at my desk, silently staring at me. Normally, the intern sat in the outer office and managed the flow of visitors, but since I was there before the Capitol office was officially open, it was just me and the four walls. Or, at least, it was supposed to be. I don't know how long she had been standing there, but she clearly had been waiting for me to notice her. When I asked how I could help her, her expression grew dark and agitated, as though someone had flipped a switch. She raised one arm and started tugging at her ratty hair and humming, but didn't respond to me. I felt every fiber in my body inwardly groan in exasperation as I realized this woman wasn't all there. I had already had a similar visitor in the week before, so between that and how irritated I already was, I wasn't in the mood for more nonsense. I cleared my throat, put on my best, "I'm only pretending to be nice to you so you'll vote for my boss in November," grin, and again asked her how I could help her. It was then that I realized I had left the front door unlocked and was now paying the price. I also noticed that the woman had a child's backpack with her. It was pink, had some girly things printed on it, and it was completely stuffed. I kept one eye on my visitor, and the other on the hand holding this fuller-than-full backpack. I was sitting there looking at her cockeyed when she finally stopped humming and spoke. "Yeah, my mom is up in the legal department. Can I sit here and wait for her?" I blinked and told her that I must have misheard her. She tried again. "My mom has an appointment up in the legal department on the second floor. Can I wait for her in your office?" This is when the alarm started going off in my head. First, the state legislature doesn't have a legal department. There's a legal division that houses the general counsel and his team, but they're set up in a building 3 blocks away, not on the second floor of the Capitol. There's nothing but support offices on that floor. I knew every inch of the second floor, so that was strike one. Secondly, the legal department wasn't open. It wasn't even 8 a.m. yet, and given that we weren't in session, few staffers were at work before 9:30. Third, the legal department doesn't take appointments with random individuals, or really anyone for that matter. When they weren't doing research or reconciling bill drafts, they weren't doing much of anything besides talking to their friends. I knew this woman was a bit off and definitely lying. I told her there wasn't any legal department on the second floor. She started pulling her hair again and hummed even louder, and so help me if I've never been so frightened by humming in my life. There was something menacing about it, especially the way she glared at me and yanked at her scalp. Some of her ratty, thinning hair was already falling onto my desk. It slowly dawned on me that this woman wasn't just off her rocker. She was potentially dangerous, and I'd upset her by exposing her lie. I suddenly remembered that we had a panic button that summoned the state troopers somewhere in the office. I tried to think of where it was and how I could get to it as I asked her again how I could help her. Every hair on my neck was standing up straight. She repeated her story about waiting for her mother, but now wanted to use the phone to call her. Specifically, she wanted to use my phone, which was on my desk as usual. "It's not charged, ma'am," I lied. Someone chose that moment to send me a text, and my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. I just ignored it and kept smiling at her. I put on an even more pretend helpful tone and suggested that she speak to the troopers at the entrance. It didn't work on her. She stopped humming, but kept glaring at me as she broke into song. I can't remember all of the words, but her song included my first name, which was on my nameplate. I know better than to show fear in these situations, so I pretended not to notice her demented song and simply said, "I'm sure the troopers can help you find your mother. Our office isn't open yet, so you can't stay here." I got up and offered to walk her to where the troopers were. For some reason, this worked. She was still unhappy, but she slowly backed out of my office. I followed her out to make sure she left. She walked backwards all the way to the front door, glaring and pointing at me until she was standing in the hallway. I locked the door immediately and called the troopers to my office. Our door was partly made of frosted glass, with a design in it that had exposed regular glass. She stood there, staring at me through the frosted part, humming until 2 troopers showed up to escort her out of the building. I found out later that this woman had pulled the same shit at the governor's office and 4 other legislative offices. She sometimes had luggage with her instead of the little girl's backpack she had today. She actually bit an intern on the face once, which had gotten her banned from the building, but would show up super early to avoid being detected. I worked at a local government agency for a long time. Each summer, we would get a new crop of interns. Most were fine, some caused issues, like when we caught 2 of them making out in the file room. Overall, they were just normal kids from high school or college trying to get some work experience. In 2016, my department received an intern later than usual, right in the middle of the summer. Warner was a bit older than the usual crowd, around my age, maybe late 20s. We initially hit it off pretty well, and although I found him sort of strange, I didn't mind since he was friendly and we had some common interests. He was the only person in my department who was even close to my age. The interns were all teenagers, and the regular staff averaged around 60, older than my mom. I was psyched to have a peer to chat with, so occasionally I would eat lunch with Warner or stop to talk at his cubicle. His strangeness was mostly an outsized personality, a mix of over-the-top enthusiasm with a bit of social awkwardness. I got 0 bad vibes from the guy, though. It wasn't long before Warner started having major performance problems at work. He would produce little to no work on most days, no show or arrive late without informing anyone, and generally acted unprofessionally. One day he showed up for work at 3:15 when our workday ended at 4:30. The office manager was livid and told him to go home. His behavior bothered nearly everyone at the office, but I wasn't the one supervising him, and we had plenty of slacker interns in the past. While his antics were a bit of a spectacle, it wasn't a big deal to me. If you're wondering why he wasn't let go, 2 words: political favor. I found out from Warner himself that he was hired because his uncle donated to the campaign of our big boss. He wasn't going anywhere. Near the end of that summer, I put in my notice that I was leaving my job and relocating to a new state. Once Warner caught wind of this, he would constantly complain that it sucked I was leaving, because we barely had time to become friends. I would always laugh lightly in response and give a sympathetic, "yeah." He would start to monopolize my time at work more and more, and became disruptive to the people who sat near me. I found it slightly annoying, but I was also extremely happy to be leaving that job for reasons unrelated to Warner, so I spent my last month there not caring much about what my coworkers thought. One day he caught me leaving work and offered me a ride home. I usually took the bus, and occasionally other coworkers would offer me rides if they were going my way, so this didn't seem odd to me. I accepted and walked to his car with him. It smelled awful and was full of garbage. He hastily cleared off the passenger seat and apologized. We got on our way, but once we were on the main road, he started begging me to stop and get dinner with him. I laughed and said he didn't need to ask me that insistently. We could just stop at a diner on the way. We had a nice meal with pleasant conversation. He was intelligent and had a variety of interests, our political positions aligned, and we shared our disdain for our cranky old coworkers. I had a good time. I expressed that he didn't need to drive me all the way home now that it was late, but he kept insisting, so I relented. As I directed him towards my house, he started in again with the whining about how our developing friendship was cut short because I was moving. At this point, I was tired of hearing this. The decision to leave my job and move away from home was extremely difficult to make, and I was proud of how bold I was being. I stopped responding, and his whining faded out. We finally came up to the turn to get onto my street, and when I pointed it out, he accelerated and drove right past it, laughing. I laughed back nervously, assuming he was joking around. When I began giving instructions on how to turn around and get back, he started begging me to keep hanging out with him because he was lonely. This immediately set me on high alert. It suddenly hit me that I was in a man's car, someone I didn't know that well, who doesn't exercise proper behavior at work, which is the only context I do know him in. My instinct was to not insist I be let out of the car. I felt as if this would escalate the situation into something bad, but in hindsight, it might have been the right thing to do. Thinking fast, I told him we could hang out at the park near my house if he wanted to talk. He seemed to like that idea, and we parked and walked over. The pleasant conversations resumed. Besides the weird clinginess, he was perfectly fine to talk to, until he dumped his entire life story on me, including his prior arrest for theft, his heroin addiction, and related struggles with depression. I tried to be sympathetic, but I was really put off by this. It was a lot of highly personal information all at once, and I was still on high alert because of his prior behavior. I tried changing the subject by showing him pictures of my dog. I scrolled one picture too far, though, and the next one was a photo of me wearing makeup and posing cutely, looking a lot different than I normally do at work. He grabbed the phone and said, "Wow, you're really photogenic." I felt awkward and didn't say anything. There was a long silence. Then he launched into a weird tangent about how compatible we are, that we have similar interests, and that he wishes I wasn't moving so we could try hanging out again, but this time on a date. I didn't say anything, and he broke the silence with, "Sorry I'm saying all this stuff, I'm actually high right now. Otherwise I wouldn't have said it. I'm really sorry." Internally, I freaked out. He had definitely put his drug addiction in the past tense, and I assumed it was something he was recovering from, not currently doing. I also realized I had been in a car he was operating while under the influence. I don't know anything about heroin, so I was clueless. I felt so stupid. He immediately started whining and begging me not to judge him, saying over and over again how nice and understanding I am, and all these weird compliments interspersed with talking down about himself. I didn't know what to do, so I smiled reassuringly and told him not to worry, but that I was tired and wanted to go home. That's when he started crying. He had this weird, wheezy sob, but no tears were coming out. I sat there silently while he did this, trying to come up with some sort of graceful escape plan. My patience was wearing thin, and my anxiety was through the roof. It's strange feeling annoyed and nervous at the same time. I stood up and apologized, and told him the park was close enough to my house so I could just walk home. I was about to leave when I remembered I left my stuff in his car. I casually mentioned this and tried to make a lighthearted joke that if he wanted my dirty lunch containers, he could keep them. He finally quit the bizarre fake crying, stood up and ran over to his car to unlock it. His demeanor changed while I was getting my things. He calmly apologized for making things weird and asked if he could drop me off at home so I didn't have to walk alone at night. Not wanting to make him feel worse, I said yes, but had him drop me off a block away from the side street I lived on so he wouldn't see which house was mine. A week or two after that weird evening, at the end of August, I finally had my last day at the job and moved 1,000 miles across the country. Warner would sometimes text me long ramblings, detailing his feelings about himself or our missed opportunity. I didn't respond to these messages. Now that I wasn't near him, I didn't feel the need to placate. The text stopped after a few weeks, and I forgot about him. A few months later, I got a text from a former coworker saying, "Sorry you had to hear about it this way." Her next message was linked to a local news article titled, "Man Dies from Wounds in Riverside Stabbing Wednesday." The way she had worded it, I figured Warner was the victim, but as I scrolled through the article, I saw his mugshot and a list of charges. He was the attacker. He had murdered someone. I felt so shocked and disgusted. I couldn't believe I knew someone who had killed another human. I called an old work friend shortly after to get more details. Apparently, right after I left the job, he was fired for trashing the men's bathroom. He had thrown around anything he could lift and poured the soap out and smeared it all over the place. He lost his apartment sometime after. I have to assume that's how he ended up in Riverside. There's a lot of abandoned houses there, so the homeless and drug addict population is pretty big. I couldn't help but think that maybe the man he stabbed had refused to give him something. That maybe that's the way Warner reacts to a hard no. I knew I hadn't made the wisest decisions during my interactions with Warner, but I'm glad I avoided setting him off, since he was clearly unstable.